Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. We begin in France, where a delegation of Inuit leaders and family members of alleged victims went face-to-face with a Catholic priest charged with sexual assault. The delegation was in France all week, calling for the extradition of retired Oblate priest Johannes Revoir. Nunavut Tungavik representatives said they want him to face justice in Canada. Revoir was a missionary in Nunavut for 30 years. He's been charged in Canada for sexual assaults dating back to the 1960s and 70s. The allegations against him have not been tested in court, and he has denied abusing children. Tanya Tungalik says her father was a victim of Revoir. She met with him in Lyon on Thursday.
Looking in the eyes of an evil monster. And he didn't look that scary.
We have let him know that he can choose on his own and that we have a ticket for him and that he can travel back with us to Canada.
After the meeting, a spokesman for the Oblate said a process was underway to dismiss Revoir from the order, a process that could take up to 3 months. The Abenaki First Nation of Odanak in Quebec is raising the alarm over state recognition of Abenaki in the U.S., where several groups in Vermont are being recognized as Abenaki. Tom Fenario explains.
It isn't every day the governor of Vermont visits Montreal. Following a speech organized by the Montreal Council on Foreign Relations, Phil Scott networked with folks and emphasized the deep historic and economic ties between Vermont and Quebec.
Relationships matter, and they run deep, and it means something.
But there was another foreign relationship in the room waiting for a chance to meet with Scott, the Abenaki First Nation of Odanak.
We have grievances with the state of Vermont and their policy of state recognition of 4 tribes that claim to be Abenaki.
Jacques Watceau is a councillor for Odanak Band Council, the largest Abenaki community in Quebec. Abenaki ancestral territory consists of large swaths of what is now known as southeastern Quebec and New England. In 2011, Vermont recognized 4 different groups as Abenaki.
They're deceiving the Vermont population by claiming a heritage that is not theirs.
Watceau says that there's a reason why the 4 organizations claiming Abenaki status do not have federal recognition. Among other criteria, U.S. federal recognition requires showing evidence of self-governance since at least 1900. All 4 of the self-proclaimed Abenaki groups in Vermont were formed in modern times. Membership applications can be downloaded on some of their websites. Prospective members need to submit their genealogy for examination before being accepted. Watceau says when Odanak was approached by some self-proclaimed Abenaki in the 90s, they initially welcomed them to visit the community.
When we started asking questions, to which family are you connected and who is your ancestor, and they basically were French Canadian and they had no native ancestry at all.
The state recognized Abenaki groups in Vermont did not respond to our requests for interview. Meanwhile, Watceau was able to briefly meet Governor Scott and present him a letter outlining Odanak's concerns. Scott committed to reading the letter, but not to meeting with council at a future date.
It's the first I've heard of this, so I'm a bit surprised. But again, if we will take a look at this. The legislature will be reflecting on this, and if they see fit to change the law, they can.
Currently, the Abenaki recognized in Vermont have the right to make and sell native crafts and can receive benefits such as artist grants. Complicating matters is that there are Abenaki with ties to Odanak living in New England. Watceau says those that have legitimate ties are welcome to reach out to Odanak, but that the rest have no business representing the Abenaki Nation.
Basically, they're a bunch of settlers that are trying to claim a history and heritage that is not theirs, but they're also promoting a culture that is not theirs in schools, in the Vermont society in general, and that is very hurtful because that is cultural appropriation, not cultural appreciation.
Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
Time for a quick break. Coming up, the fight back from extinction. Stick around. Welcome back. American citizens who won a decade-long court fight for rights on their ancestral lands in southeastern BC finally got to come home this summer. Sinixt, who'd been forced by colonization into Washington state, returned to Nelson, BC to celebrate a 2021 landmark Supreme Court decision. But reestablishing themselves in this country won't be without hurdles. Here's part one of this two-part perspective series, Sinixt, Back from Extinction.
Southeastern BC, territory of the Syilx, Secwepemc, Ktunaxa, and Sinixt. Although the latter may not be known to you because according to the Canadian government, they're extinct. This is Valican, a pocket of land in the Slocan Valley 40 kilometers west and north of Nelson, BC. It's the site of Sinixt occupation that's gone on 3 decades and counting, believed to be the longest occupation in Canada.
These the peeps we're looking for?
Yeah, I was just going to take these guys up to see where we brought the ancestors back to and reburied them here. There's 64 up there.
In 1987, highway crews uncovered an old Sinixt village nearby. A few Sinixt scattered in the region, and also those living south of the Medicine Line in Washington state, took over this piece of land at the confluence of the Little Slocan River and the Slocan River.
It wasn't very respectful for the dead, you know. Our people believe that the dead is very sacred, you know, and our burial grounds are very sacred.
Over the years, that grew to 64, James says.
We'll go on up to the sites. If you're done in, don't try it.
On this day, some Sinixt who live in the U.S. come by to pay their respects.
But all those rock cairns, every one of them represents a reburial.
Canada considers every one of these people extinct, despite Sinixt beating the government in its own Supreme Court in 2021. They lived alongside Syilx, Secwepemc, and Ktunaxa in southeastern BC, part of a people whose traditional territory extended from what is now Revelstoke, BC in the north, south into Washington to what's now Kettle Point. That's until settlers, fur traders, mining and logging upset the balance.
The Columbia River, one of the most erratic in the world, is being harnessed.
Then massive damming of the area caused widespread displacement. 80% of Sinixt were pushed south of the U.S. border, rounded up with people from 11 other displaced tribes, onto the Colville Reservation. It's where they remained until now.
Possible a better life for millions both sides of the border.
I think it's pretty sad to see what it's come to, but I really blame the colonial governments for creating this.
People said to me, you know, you're going to go up there and you're going to risk this and you're going to risk that, and possibly you're going to get thrown in jail. And then I told them, yes, that's a possibility, and I could use a vacation.
Rick Desotel is an American living on the Colville Reservation in Washington state. He's also Sinixt. In 2010, Desotel, a fish and game officer, crossed into Canada and shot an elk to set in motion a fight for rights on his ancestral lands, arguing their Section 35 rights aren't void just because Canada and the U.S. created a border through their territory.
I think it's fair to say the government understood that this case would change the way we would look at cross-border peoples. I think the government saw it as a very important case and took it all the way up. But thankfully, they went 0 for 4.
Over a decade, they won through 4 levels of courts, with the Supreme Court of Canada siding with them in a 7-2 decision in April 2021. COVID delayed celebrations until this summer. 100 Sinixt came from Colville to Nelson, BC as a homecoming of sorts.
This gathering, as you see all the people here, the other, provincial leaders and Indigenous leaders, this is a networking.
Now the real work begins to reestablish themselves on their ancestral lands, lands spoken for by other tribes in the area, as well as the provincial and municipal governments, and of course settlers. Speaking of settlers, in a surprising twist, it was actually settler evidence that helped Sinixt win in court.
As a younger lawyer, I always thought I could win cases by constructing these wonderful legal arguments. But the truth is you win cases, certainly like this one, by having great evidence.
Old maps and missionary logs convinced the court that Sinixt had claim to this territory. It's not lost on Finley that how they won was using evidence from settlers who helped squeeze them off their land to begin with.
We have oral records, and after generations, you lose some of those because they weren't carried out or carried on. So with the missionaries or, any explorer or trapper that did any kind of work like that, that was huge in our case to get where we are now.
Despite the win, the government still considers them extinct somehow, while agreeing they have land rights here. A small few Sinixt remained in southeastern BC in the 1900s after others went south. They made up the Arrow Lakes Band under the Indian Act. When the last registered band member died in 1953, the Canadian government swiftly declared them extinct in the region despite their descendants living on, scattered. Once off the books, their 243 acres of reserve land was given to the BC government.
There are Sinixt people on both sides of the border, and this decision benefits everybody and is enshrining everybody.
Indigenous Services Canada told APTN the Sinixt must form a representative body and apply to be declared unextinct under the Indian Act.
We don't want to jump right into that and just have it be something that you change in 5 months or you change in 5 years or in 50 years you look back and say, we should have done this. We want to be meticulous. We want to do it right the first time so all parties involved feel like they're happy with it.
But it's not all joy. Don't forget, not all Sinixt were forced south. Some remain in the area, bureaucratically extinct, and they're not rolling out the welcome mat to their American relatives.
Well, it was a hunting rights case.
Right.
It's not whether we exist or don't exist. It's a right to come here and hunt, pure and simple. We have to re-inform people, oh, no, we're still extinct.
And she questions their intent in the region, some of the most resource-rich in the province.
Their corporate structure is Colville Confederated Business Council. So it is the council's mandate to conduct business.
While she resides in Canada, she's also a Colville tribal member. She wasn't at the homecoming, but she was well aware of the long list of sponsors who made the celebration possible.
BC Hydro, Fortis BC, Nelson District Credit Union, Nelson Kootenay Lake.
In part 2 of this perspective series, Healing Within the Sinixt, what's next in their quest to restore a presence as American citizens with ancestral lands in Canada, and what does it mean for other cross-border tribes? That's tomorrow.
And we'll continue this story on the fight back from extinction after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, as you just saw, American citizens who won a decade-long court fight for rights on their ancestral lands in southwestern BC, they're Sinixt. They lived along Silex, Secwepemc, Tunana, and the region from Revelstoke, BC, through the Slocan Valley. Colonization eventually pushed most of them into Washington state, and Canada declared them extinct in the 1950s. They want back on their lands, and a Supreme Court win in 2021 sets the stage for that, but not without hurdles. Some within the Sinixt people themselves. Here's Melissa Ridgen with part 2 of. of the Sinixt, back from extinction.
final answer and processing what I did is in the back of the room there. If I could have my daughter and my grandchildren stand up. Those are the reasons why I went up and I did what I did. For the fact that somebody had to throw out an anchor and get this started. And I elected myself. Thank you.
That's the American who came to Canada to shoot an elk in southeastern BC, setting off a rights fight. The Sinixt eventually won. Because of it, Canada could soon get 3,500 new status Indians from a U.S. tribe where they were pushed generations ago, but now have rights to the land their ancestors once lived on.
It was the evidence of Richard and Andrea and Rick and Shelley. And the trial judge said, all of that evidence went in uncontradicted and uncontested. Shelley gave wonderful evidence about, being from the rocks and the water and being from that place, and that's what it meant to be Sinixt. And that's the evidence that won the case.
Evidence that proved they lived here long before an imaginary line divided Canada and the United States. The case was watched by many cross-border tribes.
Aboriginal peoples or tribes or whatever you consider American, Canadian, whatever, they all have the same issue. They've been pushed into a place. This is my place now, I'm pushed here, you're over here, you're pushed here. And so those are the next step moving forward, is working with those people on how we come together.
Can we expect to see more Sinixt who are living south of the 49th parallel coming up here, accessing this land in the immediate future?
I pray they do.
The case had 17 interveners, U.S. tribes who share that prayer.
For all of them, this decision has tremendous implications that over time will lead to us revisiting what that border means and the role it plays in our society. No, it's not just going to be there are Canadians on this side and there are Americans on this side. There is an Indigenous people who exist on both sides of that invisible line.
Sort of a contemporary version of a pit house.
Not everyone is waiting for them with open arms, though.
Become the site operator.
Marilyn James is an activist of mixed ancestry that includes Sinixt. She's a Canadian citizen living in BC at Valican, but also a Colville tribal member.
As is our way, in order to be here, you got to circle the pit house.
BC eventually appointed her caretaker of this site.
It's on your heart, eh? This heritage site is carbon dated at something like 3,500 years, give or take, a few hundred years.
She has a small but fierce network of non-Indigenous supporters who worry about Americans asserting their rights here.
Are you worried that that would be one more corporation, Indigenous corporation, that would...
Oh, no doubt. If it were to go a certain way. Are there colonized people everywhere? Of course there are. Is there some highly dysfunctional, disengaged people, disengaged from culture, disengaged from practice, disengaged from even knowing? Like, there are Indian people out there just making up because they don't know.
While she worries about her relatives' intent, they say she's not even one of theirs.
What are they saying you are?
I'm Chinese, and I am part Chinese. And they're saying I'm Okanagan. But if they're developing a confederacy where the Okanagans are all part of it, and the Sewupmik are part of it, and the Tana are part of it, how is it that I don't belong?
The scars left by colonization and infighting between modern and traditional Sinixt on either side of the border can be seen in a fight over baskets. Yes, the woven kind. These are on display at a museum in Rossland, a mining town in the area.
They were saddlebags.
Okay.
And so one survived. That one's at, I think it's supposed to be like at 500 years. And the corn husk basket is something like at a couple hundred years. And all natural dyes and stuff.
And these are Sinaiacs from your mother?
From my mom, so there are family baskets.
This raises a really important point that we can talk about, and it's going to lead into the real star of the show, this basket that's sitting between Andrea and I.
At the homecoming celebration in Nelson, BC this summer, Colville Tribe's Shelley Boyd, a devout Sinaiac advocate and community leader, delighted in unveiling this.
What we have not had were any baskets until the last little while, when 2 baskets have come from 2 Sinaiac families.
I know there has been, a lot of dialogue in this community around Marilyn James's baskets, which are not Sinaiac baskets.
Where's the basket?
I have pictures.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to see?
Sure.
Here's the basket. And I can show you a close-up of it, too.
It's the same exact basket.
On top of the infighting and rejection by the Colville tribe, the BC government has now terminated its agreement with James to caretake Valakin. So she says she's reoccupying this occupation site.
Well, they're trying to run me out of here now.
Why?
Okanagan Nation Alliance and Colville tribe have been complaining to the ministry, and I informed Roger Tinney that he could come and arrest me if he wanted to. I'm not going. Yeah. I was responsible for bringing those first 6 back, and the rest of them that are up there, I have responsibility. I can't just bring them here, rebury them. Why do you think we had to go get them in the first place? Because the ministry dug them up and hauled them off. You think I'm going to trust the ministry to them again?
APTN happened to be at Valakin when Rick Desotel and his family came by to pay their respects to ancestors. Neither spoke to each other.
He didn't even talk to me. I see people who call themselves traditional who make Cree or Lakota regalia, dance to Cree songs. What about that is us?
Whatever the future holds, they'll need to put aside differences and apply to the government to be delisted as extinct. That means they need to work together and form a representative body to deal with the Crown.
We need to put on that federal registry that we are a Canadian tribe.
Provincial officials and leaders from other First Nations in southeastern BC attended the homecoming in Nelson, shaking hands and welcoming Sinaiacs. But it remains to be seen how they'll feel when Sinaiacs start asserting rights in the region and wanting a land base.
I appreciate everyone who has come. Limlim.
Melissa Ridgen, APTN National News in the Slocan Valley, British Columbia.
Just a really great perspective series. I'd encourage you to check it out. A beautiful looking webpage. You can find that and much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks so much for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.